Good afternoon. It's January 29th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. The Republicans just wrapped up their annual retreat in Florida, and President Trump rallied the troops. He promised to work with them, and the agenda being laid out seems to be called for one large reconciliation bill as opposed to two bills that have been discussed previously. The economic side of the bill will be important to each and every American. With that in mind, it's imperative we all understand what goes into a bill that affects us and the cost of living going forward. Inflation has been eating away at our buying power, and the goal should be to reduce both inflation and, in some cases, the real price of goods and services we buy and use. Trump and Vance had addressed one of the root causes of price increases with the high cost of energy. Some of that cost can be attributed to the Biden administration's war on fossil fuels. When you place limits on future exploration, it tends to skew the market and drive energy prices higher. The first item up in the economic side of this bill will be to extend the 2017 tax cuts passed in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. The goal of that bill was to boost economic growth by reducing both corporate and individual tax rates. It was successful as the economy boomed in the first 3 years of Trump's first term, only to be sideswiped by the pandemic, which sent the U.S. economy into a freefall. Trump, in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, promised to reward companies that produce their product in the United States with a lower corporate tax rate of 15% on those products. Now, we've all witnessed how inflation can erode the real value of tax savings simply because we have a progressive tax system. In the 2017 tax bill, it utilized what's known as the chain CPI, which is a slower growing inflation measure. The result is that many people suffer from what is known as bracket creep. Your real income, which is your buying power, does not increase, but your tax burden does increase. A classic example of this is a limit on state and local tax deduction of $10,000. Since it was not indexed to account for inflation, it's catching more and more households, and many of them are now in red states where it was intended to get people in blue states. On the corporate side of that investment, it is needed was severely restricted with a rise in interest rates to combat inflation. Trump policies will have to thread the needle with economic growth with reduced inflation to get interest rates back down to where corporate borrowing costs are more in line with future investment. Now, it's no secret that Trump's economic plans rely on strong consumer spending and corporate investment. That relies on favorable monetary conditions, and this becomes the problem that Republicans will have to solve with the economic portion of this single reconciliation bill. The second pillar of Trump's economic plan is deregulation. The Biden administration issued a plethora of regulations that made it difficult for businesses to expand and grow. Many of these regulations were part of their attack on fossil fuels and their full embrace of green energy policies. Now, you can expect Trump and Republicans to both go after many of those regulations through executive orders in the legislative process. The third pillar of Trump's economic plan is one that seems to be getting the most attention in the media. Trump views tariffs as an important part of his economic plan and uses them to both protect American workers and businesses as well as a negotiating tool with other nations. Now, we saw this play out this week when Colombia refused to accept flights from Colombian nationals being deported. Some say we should call them being repatriated. Trump immediately threatened to place a 25% tariff on Colombian products being imported to the U.S. Within hours, the Colombian president reversed course and not only accepted the deportees, but sent his own plane to Panama to retrieve them. But tariffs are a two-way street and could increase costs to consumers. Being honest, when you put a tariff on a product, the producer and seller simply add that to the cost. But Trump is absolutely correct when he says that other nations have taken advantage of the United States by shipping products to us while putting up both financial and regulatory barriers to U.S. products in their nations. European countries are especially good at this strategy. An example of this comes from decades ago. When toaster ovens were first introduced in the marketplace, they were hugely popular in Japan. General Electric was the major producer of these ovens and garnered a huge share in the Japanese marketplace. Suddenly, Japan issued new wiring requirements for toaster ovens sold in Japan. By the time General Electric could retool and redo the wiring that meet this new requirement, Japanese manufacturers had brought their own toaster ovens to market and recaptured their Japanese market. Well, Europeans try to protect their smaller and less efficient agriculture industry by placing both tariff and non-tariff barriers to U.S. agriculture. The average tariff for EU products imported to the U.S. is 3.5%, while U.S. products get a 5.5% tariff in Europe. In agriculture, it's even more unfair. The simple average of agriculture products from Europe to the U.S. is 4.7%, while the tariff on U.S. agriculture products is 13.7%. And there are quotas on how much can be imported from the U.S. These are the type of things that Trump talks about and is trying to make it a little more fair. And I should mention one other thing about inflation and tariffs. India and China have some of the highest tariffs, and they don't have any inflation. Now, all these are difficult issues that the Republican House will have to negotiate, and with such a slim majority, the task for Speaker Johnson is difficult. Now, I suspect Trump will have to have some strong conversations with the Republican holdouts to get a single reconciliation bill passed in the House. The task should be a lot simpler in the Senate. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoy the podcast, head over to YouTube because I think TikTok's going to boot me off.